Okay, so firstly, let's start with any questions
Actually, my question was actually about that.
about that one too. Okay, so let's try it out. I mean, I don't know if you were the one who asked this
No, I
one.
did, yeah.
You were the one? Okay.
I just had to, yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about it. How shall we approach this one? So what this problem asks for is, so basically I have two flip-flops out here, and we have given propagation delay, contamination delay, setup time, hold time for each one of them. And then we have two combination logic for each one of them. We are given the contamination time, contamination delay, or in the propagation delay. And what it's asking for is write the specifications for the overall block. So one thing to bear in mind is that setup time and hold time are concepts which are not simply about a flip-flop. They are for any combinational logic. So I give you a black box, and that black box has some input, some output, and has a clock. And I can always define a setup time and hold time for this black box. So in this particular case, let's imagine I had not given you the details of this box. Then the input out here would certainly have some timing requirement relative to this clock. And of course, the genesis of those timing requirement is that internally there's a flip-flop, and I have to make sure that I meet the timing requirements of that flip-flop. So first thing that we start out with is, let's say we worry about the setup time, and clearly in this case, the input uh, through the combinational logic 1 eventually is going to hit this register. And if the input changes in a fashion that after it has gone through this combination logic, it violates the setup time of R1, then we have a problem. Okay, so now let's the thing that we're asking for is that what is the requirement on in? If in is changing, then how much in advance of clock should it become stable, and that would define the setup time, right? Now, let's say if the input is changing, then the effect of that can be felt as early as 1, which is the contamination delay, and when the input stabilizes, then its effect will be felt as late as 3 time units. So if we firstly, let's start out with, in case of this situation where we're worried about the setup time, which delay is important? Which would you worry about, contamination delay or would you worry about propagation delay in this case?
Propagation.
Propagation, and why is that? Yeah, in case of setup time, you're kind of worried about not changing too late, right? I mean, if a signal changes too late, I have a problem. And so intuitively, propagation delay and setup time kind of go hand in hand, whereas hold time is always about changing too quickly. Okay, so the idea is that so let's say I have a clock. Let's focus on some particular clock edge on this clock, and if I change within 3 time units, if input changes within 3 time units prior to that clock edge, that window, then I potentially have problem, right? Because the effect, actually, let's take it back. The native setup time of this flip flop is 3 time units. So if this CL1 wasn't there, then I couldn't have changed in that 3 time unit window prior to the clock edge. But then this CL1 adds another 3 time units of worst case delay. So let's imagine that somewhere prior to this, so I'm going to unfortunately have to use the blackboard today. Actually, if I can ask favor from one of you as I write stuff, if you can periodically take the images and then email to me so that I can post them. Okay, cool. Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Let's see. Okay, so R1's native setup time was 3 time units, and sorry, I'm drawing on the wrong edge. Let's focus on here. So R1 should have been stable. R1 requires signal be stable 3 time units before that, but the combinational logic has another delay of 3. So let's imagine that 4 time units before this edge in changed. And if that happens, then since CL1 can have a delay of as much as 3 time units, so what may happen is that the signal may change at the input of R1 a 1 time unit just prior to the edge, and that would create problem. So therefore, in this particular case, it stands to reason that in should become stable 3 plus 3 time units prior to the clock edge. Okay, and therefore the setup time requirement on in is going to be 6 time unit. What about the output? So output are so that's the setup time requirement. Now let's look at what is the clock period we can sustain on this system. Okay, so how fast can the clock run? And then the third requirement that I would have is what is the hold time requirement on n? Okay, so what's the setup requirement on n? What's the hold requirement on n? And what's the clock period? So let's talk about how fast can my clock run? So we have the output of R1 going to R2. And if you recall, sort of the situation we have is that once the clock edge happens on R1, it can take some time unit for the output of R1 to change. That in this case is the propagation delay, which is 2 time units. Then I can take as much as 5 time units through CL2, so that's 7. And the effect should reach the input of R2 enough in time so that the setup is met. Setup in this case is 2. Oh, sorry, setup in this case is 4. So that means I should have 2 units of propagation delay here. I should have 5 units of propagation delay here, that's 7. And I should meet the setup time, which is 4, 11. So from R1 to R2, the minimum clock cycle is 11 time units. But is that sufficient? Do I need to check something else also? Well, actually I do. This one, right? I mean, input is presumably changing also as a result of the clock cycle. So I think in general you may also have to worry about some constraint out here, although in this case that's not the bottleneck. Okay, in the case bottleneck is out here. Let's look at hold time. So R1 to R2, am I meeting the hold time requirement? So let's look at R1. R1 can change as quickly as 1, can propagate through CL2 as quickly as 1 again. So the effect can be felt 2 time units after the clock arrives. And the hold time here is 2, so we just barely meet it. Okay. If on the other hand, let's say CL2 had a contamination delay of 0.9, then I would have violated the requirement out here. Okay.
But if it was 0.9, the circuit just wouldn't work at all?
If this guy was 0.9, then that means that occasionally, depending upon the data, I'll have hold time violation, and then therefore the circuit will work incorrectly, or this flip-flop may go into metastability. Okay. Now let's imagine okay, so that's one hold time check. We also have to check the hold time situation out here, which is for how long after the clock edge should in be kept stable. So anyone wants to take a shot at that?
You have to take the whole time of R1.
Okay.
And then you subtract the contamination delay of CL.
And you subtract the contamination delay of CL1. Okay. And so if I look at R1, R1 says that input at R1 cannot change for 2 time units after the clock edge. If I look at CL1, CL1 says that, the effect of the in to the input of R1 takes at least time unit 1. That means the true hold time as seen by in to clock is 1 time unit, right? Because if in starts changing 1 time unit after clock, its effect will not be felt until 2 time units after clock, and that is sufficient. So we subtract contamination out of this hold time, and that will give me the hold time out here. So what's happening in this case is two things. Firstly, you have to check whether the circuit works, what is the minimum clock cycle it can work at, and whether the hold time constraints are met. That is an R1 to R2 issue. Okay. And then separately, you have to give a setup requirement and hold time requirement on the input. That's for the whole circuit. I don't know whether I asked for all of it out here, but sort of in a problem circuit like this will face that. Uh, we can, looking at this, we can also sort of say something about out. What we can say is that after a clock edge, output can change as quickly as 2 and will become stable no later than 8, right? So whatever is the characteristic of R2 are basically the characteristic that we will see it out. And the other thing which may come up is the following, that if this in is coming from another logic module, which in itself is changing on a clock cycle, then the delay of CL1 can matter. Let's imagine I had made the propagation delay of CL1 to be 10, hypothetically. And then if input is changing as a result of a clock itself, then this delay is going to affect my clock cycle also. So intuitively, clock period is affected by the worst case path, which starts from a flip-flop and ends at a flip-flop. And you have to look at all such paths in the circuit. And setup times then are for the true inputs to the circuit. Let's make a change out here. Let's imagine that R2 were to get the clock a little bit later. So let's imagine that out here, so let's say here I had a delay. So let's say I inserted a module out here, which is a delay of tk equal to 5. How will it affect things? Well, what is happening now is that the clock on the R2 is arriving a little bit later. So do you think it's going to help me or hurt me? Or help in one dimension and hurt in another dimension? Okay, so let's try from the quieter side of the room. What will happen to my setup time constraint? So if I look at R1 to R2 and think about the setup time, is it helping me or hurting me? It's helping, right? Because as if I have a stretched clock cycle, right? Because data produced on R1 has to meet the setup time on R2 by the next clock edge. But the next clock edge at this guy is actually more than one clock period away, because I'm benefiting from this extra delay. Right? So it's as if my clock period was enhanced by 5 time periods. If on the other hand this Q was negative, which means that R1 sees the clock edge later than R2, then my budget goes down. Okay. Sticking with tk equal to 5, now let's look at hold time. Is it hurting the hold time or helping the hold time constraint? It is hurting, because now what is happening is that this guy is coming later and I have to meet the hold time here. Okay. In this particular case, what's going to happen is that the R1's effect can be felt as soon as one out here, as soon as one out here. So at 2 time units after the initial clock edge. But this clock edge has not even arrived. Okay, so we have some weird problem happening already out there. Okay, so we are now kind of missed some stuff. So you have to sort of whether the skew helps you or hurts you and all really depends upon the topology of the circuit. And one has to carefully kind of analyze it. So don't go into these circuits remembering just the formula. Okay, that can be dangerous, because depending upon topology, it can hurt or help. Yeah.
Here, if it's changing, if the input is changing before the clock edge and after the setup time, it's kind of violating the setup time, right?
Yeah, it's violating the setup time. So that circuit will already be messed up. Okay. So, let's see. So, yeah. Any other questions around this theme of setup and hold time? So again, the advice I would have is, when faced with these problems, the key go back to the basics really. Okay, the basic thing really is that over a path starting from a flip flop and ending at a flip flop, the two things that I had said, which is analyze the worst case situation, propagation delay plus the worst case, basically propagation delay all along, and that should meet the setup time. And analyze the fastest situation, which is contamination delay all along the way, and it should meet the hold time. And if you are given the skew, then it depends upon the direction of the skew, because I could give this problem with a positive skew and a negative skew, and the answer would be different. Okay, so you have to keep in mind the sign of the skew, so to say. Okay, whether the skew is kind of helping you or hurting you. Questions? Okay. Let's get rid of this. Let's see. So last time I had done these. Okay. Let's try something on the board. Okay. So this is analogous to one of the problems I had in the homework and also in this class. So what's happening is that I'm giving you digits. The digits are arriving, and at any point in time, you have to tell me whether the number you have seen thus far. So digits are arriving MSB first, or whatever, most significant digit first. So let's say if I was trying to send you the number 783, I'll send you 7 first, then 8, then 3. Okay, but now imagine I'm just sending you a bunch of decimal digits, and I want you to know whether this number is divisible by 5. The number you have seen thus far, is it divisible by 5? How would you approach this?
Least significant bits.
Hmm?
Just look at the least significant bits.
Okay, so just look at the latest digit you have received, if it's a 0 or a 5. Okay, good. What if I were to ask you, is this number divisible by... we had done 3 in the class, we had done 7 previously. Okay, 4 is easy, 2 is easy, 5 is easy. What about 6? Huh?
2.
Okay, it's divisible, so should be divisible by 2 and divisible by 3. Okay, there are a couple of ways you can approach this. One is you can have 2 statements. Essentially, you can check for divisibility by 3 and the last digit. Okay, let's take divisibility by 7, which is something which we had in the homework. So the approach I had done was to have essentially have maintain a state for each possible modulo remainder value. So when I start out, I have nothing. So I am in the state which says remainder is 0. And then every time I get the next digit, it's as if my new number is 10 times the old number plus the new digit I got, right? So let's say I had received the number 7, 8 thus far. Then when I got 3, then my new number is 7, 8 times 10 plus 3. Agreed? Okay. And I can state the same thing for the remainder. If the remainder I had seen thus far, so 78 was really a remainder of 1, right? So I could say 78 represented a number which is 7 times n plus 1, right? Because the remainder was 1, 7 times n plus 1. And now I got 3. That means my new number is 7n plus 1 times 10 plus 3, which is the same as saying 70n plus 10, because 1 times 10 is 10, plus 3, that is 13. So 70n plus 13, 70n is divisible by 7, I don't have to worry about it. I have to focus on 13. 13 modulo 7 is 6, so that means when I got the 3, then the remainder has to be 6. So I will jump to the state corresponding to a remainder of 6. So the idea is, so a general way of checking divisibility by some number n is to maintain all possible remainders, 0, 1, 2, 3 through n minus 1, and then work out how do you jump between them. For special cases like 2 and 5 and 10 and all, maybe you can just look at the last digit or the last couple of digits and check that out. but the general strategy is the one which kind of I articulated. Okay, let's look at this problem. Design an FSM that outputs the result of integer division by 3. So the idea is input is dividend in binary. Uh, uh, the current state represents the current remainder, and the output is the quotient in binary. Okay, so I'm feeding you binary number, and I'm at all times I'm basically saying, tell me. And what you are doing is you're spitting out. You have to keep spitting out what the quotient has been thus far. So the dividend is being fed one bit at a time, most significant bit first, generates the binary quotient one bit at a time against most significant bit first. Okay, so here it's a twist on the problem. Previously, we were saying that you have to tell me basically is the number thus far divisible by 3. Now we are asking, I'm not interested in knowing that. I'm actually interested in knowing what the integer. So if I fed 78 thus far, 78 div 3 is 26, so you should have sent out 26 thus far. Okay, so the way this works is, so states represent the current remainder, and then what you do at all times is that you basically, let me slip to the state diagram. Okay. Okay, so I'm maintaining possibilities of different modulo values. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. I'm starting out here. And what happens if I get a 0, I stay in the same state, but I output a 0. Now let's say I get a 1. So I'm going to jump to the state corresponding to 1, but I still would output a 0 because thus far I have seen, okay. So the actual transitions that are happening out here is still corresponding to my remainder machine. But the only difference that has happened is that every time I'm taking a transition, I'm also getting to send out one of the next bit in that for the number that we have seen thus far. So if let's say the user fed, let's see if it makes sense. Let's say the number I got was 6. So 6 would be 1, 1, 0, right? So what would happen out here? The first thing I get, so firstly, 1, 1, 0 would correspond to 1, 1, 0 divided by 3. It should correspond to 2. So that I should be getting 0, 1, 0 as an answer. Let's see if it does that. So I start out here. The first thing I get is 1. I get a 1, I output a 0. Okay, so thus far it matches. Now I'm in a remainder of 1. I get another 1. So so if I get another 1 at this stage, I'll go back to a remainder of 0, but this time I'm outputting a 1. So that made sense. So now I have 0 followed by 1 as my output thus far. And then finally I get a 0. So I stick out here and output a 0. So as you can see, at 1, 1, 0 resulted in an output string of 0, 1, 0, which is what we wanted. Okay, let's say I got 7 as the input. So that would have been 1, 1, 1. 1, 1, 1 divided by 3 is still 2. And as you would see, that's what will happen. Once I'm in this state, if I get another 1, I'll output a 0 out here. So this machine, so this is with tiny little modification in terms of the output. I've now made it into something which is serially outputting the quotient of the resulting value that we're seeing. Okay. Same kind of concept can be applied to other arithmetic operations also. So you could imagine, for example, let's say if I were to tell you I'm giving you a number, so this is called serial arithmetic. So I may send you 2 numbers 1 bit at a time, and I would say tell me the output also 1 bit at a time. Okay, so kind of the idea generally is that I give you numbers least significant bit first, and I ask you to do an addition. So let's say I were to say you are given a 1 bit adder, and you have to add two n-bit numbers. Obviously, you cannot, just using one bit adder, you cannot add the two n-bit numbers in the same clock cycle. So you need n clock cycles, but you are going to do one clock tick at a time. Now, can I do this addition from the MSB side? I cannot, because carry always propagates upwards. So a problem like this would basically say that the inputs are coming to me least significant bit first. So I'm going to give you the least significant bit of the two operands. You are going to add them, you're going to spit out the sum, and the carry you are going to keep for the next clock cycle. Next clock cycle, you are going to get bit number 1 of the two operands, or bits number 1 of the two operands. And you are going to now again use this thing to spit out the sum on the output and keep the carry. So what's happening now in this case would be that I would end up getting kind of a black box where there is a LSB is coming on each one of the input, and output is coming also LSB first. So this is what we'll end up looking like. So key point to remember is that this is a 1-bit thing, this is a 1-bit thing. Okay, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to numbers are arriving LSB first. Okay, so this is called a serial adder. Now I'm still missing something. I have to do something about the carry. So how would you handle the carry in this thing? What would you do? Yeah, go ahead.
You load the carry out into like a register, and then have that be the carry in for like, the next clock cycle.
Correct. So let's imagine, for the sake of argument, that carry in is here. Okay, so what will happen now is that I'll take the carry out, I'll load it into a register. So this is a D flip-flop. Okay, so what's happening in the circuit is that every clock tick, the carry out which is being produced is stored in this 1-bit register, and in the next clock tick, it's available to use as a carry in. And by that time, the next 2 bits would have arrived, and on the output here, I'm going to keep getting my this is a sum. So basically, on the sum over multiple clock ticks, what happened? I didn't want summer. Okay, so 1 bit at a time, sum will appear. Okay, so this is called a serial adder. So the previous example I had was, it was kind of a serial divider, serial divide by 3. Now I have a serial addition. You could do the same thing with subtractor and other kind of operations. Okay, multiplication. Do you think you can do multiplication this way?
Yeah, you can do it in a similar way.
Yeah. So how would you do it?
Depending on how many bits is the.
Let's take a simple binary things number coming in. So, okay, a beauty of this adder is I don't have to tell you in advance how many bits my operands are. I can add 15-bit numbers, 32-bit numbers, 64-bit numbers, because all I need is more clock cycles, right? Can multiplication be done this way?
Well, when do you know when it's done?
Oh, presumably what will happen is that there will be some additional signal which basically says start adding now, end adding now. Okay, so I'll probably, like, there would be some additional signal saying go or whatever, start, done, something like that.
And would the done be like the counter?
No, you can imagine that there's a start signal, and as long as, or whatever, valid signal, as long as the valid signal is high, the data inputs are valid. And when the valid goes low, then we are done, basically, right? So we have seen these kind of handshake signals in some of the problems in the class. So that's easily handleable. There's just separate signal says. So what you will presumably do is that when valid is low, you will reset this register so that the initial carry is 0. Yeah.
For the 2 bits adding on the left, it's cycling from 0th bit of the 2 numbers.
Correct. Start LSB first, right? Inputs arrive in LSB first. Okay. So multiplication, can I do it this way? It's a little bit trickier because the problem is that I have to multiply the upper digits also, right? I mean, I cannot just do it the lower ways. So multiplication is trickier to kind of structure this way. Okay. Let's look at some examples of FSMs. Okay, and this one I want you guys to try it out. Okay. So let's look at these things. So in all these cases, imagine what is happening is I'm giving you inputs from start, and at all times you have to output whatever is written out here. Okay, so basically what this says is that the inputs can take the value 0 or 1 or 2. So every clock tick I'm getting an input, and the input in this case could, at each clock tick, could either be 0 or 1 or 2, the symbol, okay? And I want my machine to have an output signal, and that output is high whenever this condition is satisfied. So let's start with this. An input stream coming in, and I want to say the output is 0 unless this condition is satisfied, which is if thus far I have seen exactly 2 2s, then I want the output to be high. You get it? So when I start out, output is 0. I have not seen any 2. Let's say my string came out to be 1 1 2 2. Well, after the second 2, should go high. So how would you approach this one?
It doesn't have to be consecutive,
Huh?
right? Can it be 2 1 2?
Yeah, it could be 1 1 2 1 1 1 1 1 1 2. And that stage, the output goes high.
So you just
Hmm?
3 states. If you see 1 2, you go to the middle state. No,
Can you,
1,
yeah, so can you go and draw on the board?
Yeah.
And now, I know now you're going to speak, but got stuck. Okay.
You have like an input, or is it?
Yeah, let's say there's a signal called in and a signal called out.
In equals 2. Actually, need each state.
Yeah, you need 4 states. You also need a failure state.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Could you go ahead? Sure. Okay. So what's happening out here is the following. We start on an initial state, and then we spin there as long as we don't see a 2. If we see a 2, we move to the next state, which he has labeled as S1. And again, we spin there as long as we are not seeing a 2. The moment I see a 2, I go to a state which is the success state. We have now seen 2 2s. And we stay there as long as we are not seeing 2's. In the moment I see a 2, then I have violated the requirement of 2 2's, so I move out of that state and go to essentially a dead end state and kind of stay there. Okay, so that's an easy example, exactly 2 2's, and as you can imagine, I mean exactly n of something, I can always solve this particular way. Questions on this?
I don't get the failed state part.
So what's happening is, after I have seen 2 2's, there are 2 sets of possibilities. I never see a 2 again, in which case I stay in the state that is called as S2, or I happen to get a third 2. The moment I get a third 2, then no longer is this true. Exactly 2 2's is no longer true. So I now move to another state, and now I have to stay there because I will never be able to meet this condition. I have seen 3 2's. I have seen more than 2 2's, right? I mean, at that state. So I'm just going to move to that dead end state. And I guess what he did not draw out here is that I basically have something self edge which you just stay. Okay. So remember, you have to draw that self edge. Okay. Yeah.
So basically, in that regard, the valid signal is still high. I mean, assuming that you have, say, a string of length, I don't know what, of some length, and the valid signal is still high.
Valid signal would be high from the point I saw the second 2 to the point I see the third 2. If I never see the third 2, the valid signal will remain high forever. Okay? Make sense? Okay. Now, everyone other than him is going to try the next one. And what I'd like you guys to do is perhaps just talk among each other and all. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few minutes and you work it out. Okay, maybe you might want to move next to someone, discuss the thing. So this time around, my input is a binary input. 0, 1 contains the same number of instances of the substring 0, 1 and the substring 1, 0. Okay, so the idea is, let's say I start out, I get 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, thus far. So what happens? 0, 1, 0. Immediately I have met this requirement because I've seen 0, 1 and I've seen a 1, 0. Let's say I get 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0. Then it will go high. If I get another 1, it will go low. Okay. So at any point in time, what you have to say is how many substrings I have, the number of substrings 0, 1 that I have seen and number of substrings 1, 0 that I have seen, the 2 ought to be equal. Okay, this is a little bit harder to think, so I would suggest collaborate a little. Well, I upload this picture actually.
Oh, it's not like a register. They just keep track of the number. And then you like compare it.
That's not like
Can you do what? No, I want to draw FSM diagram, like a state diagram. I'm not looking for a circuit.
If you see 1, 0, 1, 0, then that wouldn't.
If you have seen 1, 0, 1, 0, right? So you have seen 2 1 zeros and 1 0 1.
Yeah, so that would.
That's one way.
supposed to be
Because zero is not the same as one.
I know.
So it's one zero. And you said zero, just state it. As long as it's one, it's zero. So if it's zero, if you keep saying one, just go back to zero. I'll go to as long as it's zero. I was gonna do the other side if you want to see the last. And then you just each time you put it into zero, you just have some kind of imaginary. That's not emphasis. Yeah. And then the output, okay, the output one. And then you have well, I mean, you would do it. But even the output, like, how can you how you get it?
Every time you have a 0, 1, if 1, 0, there must be even none must be no.
You done?
The difference must be.
You done?
I think so.
Okay.
You can actually control right.
Contains the same.
Oh,
Oh,
that
I
makes sense. Because there are zeros in this range. Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking too, about like 1, 0.
oh yeah. Yeah, I was
So we are doing a set of FSM problems. Currently we are doing the second one, which says the following. There is a FSM with an input, 1-bit input, 1-bit output. Your output at any given point in time should be high if thus far the number of 0 ones you have seen and the number of 1 0 you have seen match. Okay? And just talk with others and let's try to work it out.
So if you already see a 0, 1,
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, that this is the set of values the input can take. So imagine input, so in this case, input could take the value 0, 1, or 2. In this case, the input symbols are either 0 or 1.
Oh my god.
You done?
Not sure.
Not sure.
Thinking.
Thinking. Okay. Pardon me? No, I want you to draw an FSM diagram. You cannot use data file.
I think Speaker got it, but I don't know if it counts all the cases.
Okay, let's wait for a couple of minutes and then we'll try out solutions. How are we doing there?
I think I'm done.
You think you're done? Okay.
Oh, that's pretty good. Pretty smart.
Okay, why don't you come up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Everything's broken down.
Okay, so maybe you can explain to everyone kind of the intuition behind this.
Yeah, so I think whenever you have a 1, 0, there must be like when you change the next input from like 0 to 1, the amount of the substring 1, 0, and 0 must be equal. So like their difference can never exceed 1. Like the difference at most is 1. So notice.
So, okay, so firstly, any objections to this particular FSA? Yeah.
But if you see a 1 at the beginning, you've seen equal numbers of 0, 1s, and 1, 0s, so it shouldn't output.
No, at the beginning you haven't seen anything yet.
No, I mean after start.
Okay, so after,
You see a single 1.
yeah, so after start you see a single 1.
So you've seen equal numbers of 0.
No. You have not seen a 0 yet.
You haven't seen any of either. So isn't that equal? Or is that not?
Okay. Okay, no, that's a good point. Okay, so I have not seen anything yet. Okay, so actually by that logic, I should have 1 in the start state also. Okay, so let's say for the moment, we assume that contains the same number means that I've seen at least 1. Okay, and then let's modify it for it. So you're right. From the strict definition of the problem, this is not correct. So the issue that's being raised out here is that when I'm starting out, I have not seen any number of 0, 1s, okay, and therefore I have seen equal number, and that remains true even when I reach out here. So you'll have to treat that separately, like a car that starting condition separately. Okay, but let's ignore that for a moment. So the strategy out here is that my pattern is any number of 1s followed by any number of 0s mean I have seen 1, 1, 0. And then the moment I see a 1, I go to the next situation where I pass this thing. And then after this, I have 2 possibilities. If I see a 1, again, it's going to back out here. And this one is going to be the complementary path. Okay. So if we modify the problem statement saying that contains the same number of instances of 0, 1, and 1, 0, and I have seen at least 1 of each, then the solution that he has given is correct. Okay. Now, how would you modify it to fix this problem?
Wait. Is 1, 0, 1, 0, 1 a valid?
Say it again. Is what?
1, 0, 1, 0, 1.
1, 0, 1, 0, 1. Okay, so 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. I have seen 1, 2. So I've seen 2 of these, and I have seen 2 of these.
That's valid.
That's valid. It won't work here. Let's see.
I think 0.
1, 0. So it's what? 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. Okay. So 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. Okay, it fails.
I think the problem lies in that you must choose the. I think you have 2 kind of.
Okay, so you want to do it? Let's try this. so let's see. So if you get a 1, so start with 1, okay, get n number of 1s, get to receive equal. Then anytime I get a 0, then I wait there and look at back 1 and 1. Okay, so this one is correct. Okay, so what's happening out here is that, so one way of thinking about it is think in terms of the patterns which are acceptable, right? So last time I talked about kind of that regular expression kind of notation. So there are two ways I could satisfy this situation. So the left branch basically corresponds to, I have received any number of ones, okay? So sorry, at least 1, 1 and possibly more. So 1 plus. Then I have to get a 0. And I can receive any number of zeros. So that would mean I have received one transition like this. Okay. And actually, let me rewrite it. Received 1, 1, followed by 1 or more ones. Sorry, 0 or more ones. Then I have received the 0. Then I have received 0 or more zeros. And then I receive a 1 and back to, this is what is going on out here, this pattern, right? So any number of times, this pattern that occurs is what I'm kind of looking for. And the other right-hand side is kind of a complementary version that is going on. Let's try the next one. I have an input which can take 3 values, 0, 1, and 2. And what I'm looking for it at any given point in time, output should be high if the input thus far ends in either 0 or 1, 1 or 2, 2, 2.
What is the n?
Huh?
What is the n?
Thus far. Like ends in as in, if I'm looking at the current clock cycle, then either the most recent clock cycle I got a 0, or the recent 2 clock cycles I got 1, 1, or recent 3 clock cycles I got 2, 2, 2. Consecutive, yeah. Done?
Yeah.
Cool. Done? Think so. Done?
It's just kind of messy, but
It's actually not messy. I mean, it's basically three patterns which we are trying to detect, right? I mean, this is analogous to what we have seen before.
I mean, the transitions get.
Yeah,
That's
that's the nature of this problem. Transitions get messy, but so who wants to come up? You want? Great. That's good. Okay. So you started out with start state. You have the pattern 1, 1. You have the pattern 2, 2, 2, and you have the pattern 0. And then anytime I get a 0, I head to the state 0. Anytime I get a 1, I get to the first state 1. And anytime I get a 2, I get to the first state 2. Okay, and I assume your other arrow. Okay. Now, one thing I would like to suggest out here is the following, that when faced with something like this, if edges are becoming too problematic, I would accept a solution where you just draw the circles and then give me a transition table. Okay, because at some stage, if there are too many edges, like for example, the extra credit problem in the P set 3 had, it was the one, if you recall, remainder by 7. Every state had to go to every state basically, and you had 9 edges, sorry, 10 edges out of, no, not 10, sorry, it had 7 edges out of every state. So there were 49 plus a few additional edges. Okay, I don't expect you to draw all of them. Okay, so just make a table in that case. Okay, so list the states and just give a transition table. That is equivalent as far as I'm concerned. What's not acceptable though is giving a circuit. The circuit for this problem would have been trivially easy, right? I could just do that state vector approach and make 3 comparators and be done with it. Okay, so when I say make me an FSM diagram or a state diagram and all, I will accept a state transition table if there are too many edges, as long as you put a statement there saying I am using this because there are too many edges or something. And I'll leave you as a judgment call, but I would say generally speaking, if you start getting into 15, 20 edges, then it's too many for purposes of an example. Okay, but up to let's say a dozen or so edges, you should be able to draw.
Would we be able to connect like all the ones together so that it looks like cleaner?
Yeah, I mean, we'll accept that. So, like for example, you can draw a single edge and then the others coalesce into that, right? I mean, so you can do that also. So anything which conveys your intent across to us, just accept it.
Or tunnels. Like, all right, like not a real tunnel.
Huh? You have what?
Not like a tunnel, like not a real tunnel, obviously, because it's not a circuit, but like he said, converging. I can make it converge into a tunnel.
Oh, convert into a tunnel.
And then like have the tunnel like.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. That's fine too. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we'll probably try to force your hand one way or the other in the final because we also want to keep grading fast because I have like a short number of days to grade everything. So we'll sort of prescribe things a little bit more out there. Okay. Yeah. So one thing I would suggest is go out on Google, look for FSM problems. There are tons of them. There's no shortage. There are entire websites located these kind of things. There are other courses and all this practice. Okay, pattern matching kind of problems are the most common ones usually. So look for different variants of those. Yeah. Go ahead.
Is there any solutions for the problems that you put on the task book?
No, there is none.
Wow.
None, and I have for a few, but they are from the publisher under the condition that I do not give them out to students. Okay, so unfortunately I cannot. But if you Google, I'm pretty sure you'll find them somewhere. Okay, so unlike me, you are not bound by those legal constraints. So just okay. Yeah. When they give these instructions, so firstly, the instruction manual does not have all the solutions, and the ones which they have given are under the constraint that I cannot handle. And by the way, incidentally, many of them are wrong. So it'll cause more confusion. Okay, so try to practice on as many FSM type problems as you can, okay, because that's really kind of the second part of the course really is about that. Remember, the other aspects of FSM are very mechanical, okay, coming up from this description to this. By the way, the ones which I had remaining out here, I think you should be able to do this one. This one is very hard, okay, so just to kind of put you out there. These are FSMs. There are things which are not FSMs, okay. So can you suggest me some examples of patterns which are not FSM? So let's take the same type that thus far I have seen something, and you have to say, and the question is of the form, output should be 1 if the pattern satisfies some condition. Okay, so give me some interesting examples of patterns which clearly are not expressible as an FSM.
Yeah, equal number of ones and zeros.
Equal number of ones and zeros. Okay. What else?
Something that makes memory.
Something that will require infinite number of states. You're not you seem a little bit perturbed, right? So you're saying so look, if I have to say that the pattern has an equal number of zeros and ones, and this has to be true forever, right? I mean, I may have received an arbitrary number of inputs thus far, and I have to be able to answer the question: was the number of 0 equal to the number of 1? Now the problem is I may get like an infinitely large number of arbitrary large number of zeros, and then an equal number of arbitrary large number of ones, and I have to be prepared for that eventuality. So I cannot bound the number of states. Okay, give me some other examples. Interesting one.
Counting how many people visit one shopping mall in a day.
Counting how many people have visited a shopping mall thus far. Okay, in the absence of any limit on like the capacity of the mall or something like that, yeah, I mean, I can have an arbitrary number of. So if you were to, so let's modify that question. I would like to output 1 if the number of people who have visited today is even. Right? I mean, can you do that?
Yeah.
Okay. How about I'm giving you a pattern and it's a palindrome. No, yes, I'm hearing both answers. Okay, so what do you think? No, you cannot. Okay. Um, so be prepared for like being able to kind of again like can the problem be done using FSM? Sometimes the answer may be no, it cannot do it. Okay. So be sort of a little careful on that one. Okay. So these were the FSM type problems. Let's look at. So this is the finals from 2013 that I had handed out. And okay, so what happens is these kind of problems, the description is overwhelming. Okay, now the thing is, I have to strike a balance between giving you details so that the problem is unambiguous, but at the same time, unfortunately, the description becomes too long. Okay, and that's always a struggle. Now, the reason I present this one is because this was actually an easy problem, but I think because of the size of the description, students made a very common mistake, and I'll tell you what that mistake was. Okay, so the problem is the following. Basically says there is a keyboard, there's a clock, and I've given you the frequency of the clock, 10 megahertz. Okay, and what's happening is ASCII keyboard, and every time you press a key, the code, ASCII code corresponding to the key is being output. So that's C6:0. And while you are pressing the key, a signal K goes up. Okay, so the signal K basically says the key is pressed, and then you can look at the keyboard to the 7-bit C signal to see what the value of the key was. Okay, and then what the problem asks for is the following: that this, you know how like we can reboot our laptops and all by pressing some key combination or something. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to emulate. So I'm basically saying there's a reboot signal which is normally 0, but whenever the system sees 3 successive distinct and complete presses of the key corresponding to the ASCII character DC2, see the table for the corresponding 7-bit code within 1 second. So the idea is that there's a key called DC, there's an ASCII code called DC2, which I press 3 times in succession within a 1 second window. The start of the first press to the end of the last press, and a press could last for more than 1 clock tick. The system should output reboot equal to 1 for 100 microseconds. Okay. So that's basically what it asks for. So it's kind of equivalent to what you often see: press a button for 3 seconds, or press a button for at least 3 seconds and no more than 5 seconds, or press it 3. So in this case, we're saying press it 3 times during a 1 second window, then the reboot happens, and the way the reboot happens is that the reboot signal has to go up for a period of 100 microseconds. Okay, and then there is additionally a reset signal. Okay, so the way, so essentially the idea out here is the moment you see the first key signal, then you have to basically say it's a potential start of a reboot. So you're going to start a timer, and the timer needs to be for 1 second. So you can compute how many 1 second for 10 megahertz will give you a certain number of clock cycles. So you have a timer for that many clock cycles. And then you have to keep doing it for any 3 keyboard presses, right? I mean, in the sense that it may be that I pressed key 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's the latter 3 which matched this thing. Okay, so kind of the so one way you can imagine doing is that every time I press the key, you take a snapshot of the counter. So you keep a counter running, you take a snapshot of the counter, and then anytime you are releasing the key, you again take a snapshot and compare it against the snapshot you took 2 key presses before. So essentially every key press, you take a snapshot when the press key was pressed, and you take a snapshot when the key was released, and then you compare the timer values, and meanwhile have the timer running, free running to do it, and you have to also watch out for an overflow condition. Okay, that wasn't the issue. I mean, students got this part. The thing is, a substantively large number of students didn't read this carefully. ASCII character DC2, which is out here, they actually ended up trying to solve for D pressed by C pressed by 2. Okay, and then that problem became incredibly hard. Okay, because now you're looking at DC2, 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 and they could never get to it. Okay, so read the problem carefully. Don't rush into it, okay? Because again, kind of the main part of the problem was easy. It's that part which basically just ended up creating the complexity, okay? Um, but by the way, I mean, I got this feedback that the descriptions themselves is overwhelming, so I'm going to try to make these simpler. But trust me, there will at least be a problem of this nature. Okay, I like giving these, so they will always be there. Let's see. I'm not going to worry about this one. Let's look at some other ones out of this one. Okay, so what we have out here is I've given you this circuit, except that this time around I'm using a toggle flip-flop. Okay, and the toggle flip-flop we have discussed in the class in Logistim also. It's there. I've given you a truth table, but the basic idea in the toggle is that if the toggle is high, then on the active edge, the output becomes output toggles. Output becomes the complement of what it previously was. Okay, and you can certainly implement a toggle flip-flop using a D flip-flop. How can you do that? Anyone?
Back to back.
No, back to back, no.
Not gate.
Huh?
A not gate.
Not a NOT gate, but you're close. I still need an input, right? XOR. Okay, so I put an XOR gate in the input. Okay. Now, what this problem asks for is that I have given you the circuit, and I'm basically asking you a series of questions, in particular, what is the next state equation and stuff like that. Okay, so once you realize that in this particular case, the function being implemented is that T is, since it's a toggle flip-flop, then the actual state that the flip-flop will get is going to be the current state XOR with whatever the input I'm seeing, right? And so now if I were to ask you a question on these things, so like for example, let's look at the upper flip-flop. So the upper flip-flop's input is coming from output of the lower flip-flop, S1, right? S1 is coming back out here. So what would be the next value of S0? Next value of S0 would be S0 XORed with the input T, which is S1. So therefore, S0 next is S0 current XORed with S1 current. Okay, and likewise, help me out. What is S1? The next value of S1. S0 XORed with S1. It's actually an XNOR. Okay, so and then the whole thing XORed with S1 again internally, right? And you'll have to simplify that equation. Okay. So anytime you have these unusual kind of flip-flops, think in terms of what the flip-flops relationship is between the input and the output, and then kind of substitute that, and then the circuits become very easy to analyze. Okay, and once you have the equation, then this problem went on to ask for some additional questions like show the state table, draw the state diagram, and fill out a timing diagram. Okay, so kind of forced you to do all of those things. It's fairly mechanical stuff. So the hard part, basically, if you may, is to kind of realize that how can you kind of reason about this thing. And again, I always like to say that focus on what would be the next value of a state output. If you come up with the equation for that, then the rest is straightforward. Okay, so let's look at this one. So what we are given out here is circuit where I have given you XOR has propagation delay and combination delay. I've given you for the flip-flop setup time, hold time, delay, and contamination delay. And then it's asking for what's the maximum clock speed. Okay, so this circuit, what is the maximum clock speed? How would you approach this?
Do you look at the propagation delay in between the, I guess the flops?
Right.
You find that first.
So firstly, recall we had given an inequality which basically was clock period is at least something. Okay, clock period is greater than equal to propagation delay for the flip-flop, source flip-flop, plus propagation delay through the combination logic, plus the setup time of the destination flip-flop. So I have to look at every pair of source flip-flop connected to a destination flip-flop through some circuit. How many paths are there of this nature? Well, I have two flip-flops, so there can be at most 4 such paths, right? I could have a path starting from upper flip-flop and ending at the first flip-flop, or starting at the first flip-flop, ending at the second one, and likewise from that. So let's see. I do have a path starting from first one, ending at the first one. I have a path starting from first one, but never goes to the second one. So that does not exist. I have a path from second one going to the first one, and I have a path from second one which ends up at the second one only. So I have 3 possible paths to consider, which are starting at a flip-flop, which are starting at output of a flip-flop and ending at the source of a flip-flop. And any one of them could be my bottleneck. So for each one of them, you'll have to calculate whether that condition clock is greater than clock is greater than propagation delay of the source flip-flop plus propagation delay through the combinational logic plus setup time of the destination flip-flop holds true.
It would be to the XOR though, right? I mean,
yeah, in this case, there's only one piece of combination logic, which is XOR. Okay. So let's see. The path which is starting from the upper flip-flop and ending at the upper flip-flop, it basically would correspond to propagation delay, which is 40. So 40 plus XOR gate, which is 30. Okay. So XOR gate has propagation 30. So okay. So 40 plus 30 is 70 plus the setup time, which is 20. So it's 90. So the path which starts from S0 and ends up at D0 has a constraint that clock period has to be at least 90. Now let's look at the path which starts at S1 and ends up at D0. Well, the flip-flops are identical, and they're still going to the XOR gate, so that's the same. Now, it's possible that I could have given you a different spec for the lower flip-flop, for example, okay, but not in this problem. And then finally, we have this one, which basically says a path which starts at S1 prime and ends up at D1. So in this particular case, starting delay is 40, setup time is 20, 60, and I'm not going through anything, so that's my constraint. So in this particular case, the maximum clock speed would be 1 over 90 picosecond, is it? Yeah, right. So that will give you the clock speed. What is the hold time margin? Okay, so hold time margin means that I have to look for the hold time violations and see that how much can I reduce the hold times by and still not be affected. Okay, so again I have to look at every source destination pairs and worry about it. And intuitively, if you're looking at this, you might say that my problem is clearly going to arise on the lower path. Okay, because that's the fastest path out here. So if I look at the lower path, it has a contamination delay of 13 picosecond, and then it has to meet a setup hold time of 5 picosecond, and there is 0 contamination delay through this thing. So it meets the requirement, right? I mean, TH should be less than the contamination delay. So 5 picosecond is less than 13 picosecond. I have a margin of 8 picosecond in this particular case. Okay. What value can we reduce flip-flops TCCQ for the what value can we reduce a flip-flop TCQ for the original circuit to still work properly without timing violations?
Just be 5.
So what value can we reduce the TCCQ 13? So I can reduce it. As I reduce it, I can reduce it all the way down to 5, and that would still work because this is still going to be the bottleneck. XOR only helps us, right? So that you can do. Say the wire carrying the clock signal from the clock source to the top D flip-flop has a delay of 40 picosecond, and the wire going to the bottom D flip-flop has no delay. Are there any timing conditions violated? So what's happening is that the clock signal which is going to the upper flip-flop has been delayed by some 40 picosecond. So what will happen there? Huh? Yeah. So clearly the effect of this is only going to be felt out here. It has nothing to do with this third path, right? So I have to. In fact, the path which will be affected out here is the path which is starting on S1 and ending at D1, ending at D0. That's the one which I have to kind of worry about. So you'll focus on that path, see whether the violation. So the thing is, since the upper one is being delayed, I am at the risk of hold time violation, and indeed, that's what will happen. Repeat the previous step, except that it's the other way which is happening. So kind of I'll let you work this thing out. Okay. So when it comes to these timing problems, essentially you have to be able to reason about these things. And the part which I would caution is, do not go with an a priori notion of whether a positive skew hurts or helps in a particular situation. It depends upon how flip-flops are connected. So you cannot just blindly use a specific formula for that one. You have to kind of look at each path, source, destination, look at what their clocks were. Let's see, should we attempt doing this? Okay.
Is this like averaging?
No, so this is this is weighted averaging. Okay, so what's happening out here is I have essentially the situation out here is there is two sources of data. Okay, and I have to output a 32-bit number. So the inputs are 16-bit each, and the output is 32-bit each. So, and what is happening is that let me just make sure that I'm making sense out here. Yeah. So what's okay? So this is what's happening out here. There are two channels of audio data coming in, 16-bit audio data, and on each channel, I'm basically doing the following computation. I'm basically saying 0.37 times the most recent value plus 0.25 times the previous value plus 0.375 times the previous to previous value. And I'm repeating the same computation on the second channel also. Okay, so that's two identical ones. And the other part in this thing is that it's not that I have things arriving in every clock tick, but there is a handshake happening. That is, each channel basically has a request signal which basically says, hey, I have the data, and only then you proceed. So kind of the idea is a finite state machine. You'll basically say, do I have the, whenever the left guy is ready, I'm going to proceed, handle that, and the right one. But you are going to output something only when you have a sample from each one of them. Okay, so you have to wait for a sample here and a sample here, and you compute, and then you send it out to the destination. Okay, so there are two things going on: arithmetic and handshaking. So in this particular case, you kind of revert to your data path and control. Okay, so your controller basically has request L, request R, and there is an ACK signal coming in, and then it's generating three outputs. Okay, indicating that. And the other part which is happening is this computation. Now, how would you do this computation? It has these weird looking things, 0.375 plus 0.25 and 0.375. Okay, so how would you do this arithmetic? So 0.25 is divide by 4, so that's shift by a couple. Okay, how about 0.375? Huh? 3/8. So you can say it is 1/8 plus 1/4. Okay, so each one of them you can do separately and then kind of add them. Okay, so that's kind of the main thing which is going on here. So remember, multiplying and dividing by constants is always straightforward. Okay, it's only when you are doing things by variables that it becomes harder. Okay, because I can take any number. Let's say I were to ask you multiply by 29. Well, you can approach it as multiply by, so 29 is 16 plus 8 plus 4 plus 1. So I can do a multiply by 16, a multiply by 8, multiply by 4, multiply by 1. So I have 4 partial products. I add them up, I'm done, right? I mean, so I don't need a multiplier itself, because a multiplier is designed for multiplying two variables. But if I'm multiplying a variable by a constant, then I can always just get away with a cheaper circuit. Okay. Likewise, for division, I can always express a number as a kind of continued fraction. I can kind of just do a sequence of break it up into divisions, bunch of divisions by powers of 2. So you can always kind of, when it comes to constant arithmetic, resist the temptation to kind of create a multiplier. Okay, that you don't, even though the number looks spooky 375, but it's actually not. You can just kind of break it up and do it. Okay. The other part out here is handshake, and this is a very common pattern which happens. So usually in digital systems, you find often the case that the data is not always present, not on every clock tick. So what's happening is that the source has the data ready only occasionally. So this kind of a pattern where request acknowledge, think of it like this audio processor is like a server. And then the left microphone basically says, hey, I have a sample here and I'm requesting service. So whenever the microphone has an audio sample, it will put the sample out here and it will raise the request line. And the idea is that the left microphone will now not do anything until it receives a signal called acknowledge. When it sees the acknowledge goes high, then it will know that it can remove the data out here. Okay, so that's usually the contract. Okay, so I want some service from you. I'm going to put the data, and I'm going to say, hey, the data is there. That's the request. And then at some stage, you will come back and say, acknowledge. Now you can remove the data. Okay, and then both parties go back to 0. So it's a very common pattern. We have seen it in sort of problems along the way in the course as well. So it occurs in many cases. In many ways, the Morse code example also had it, and also some of the problems in PSEC 3 at the back also had that kind of behavior. The trick out here is there are two parties out here. So the thing is, what's happening is the following. Audio processor is a server. It has two clients. Both of them has this property. And the audio processor, in turn, is outputting something. And so it has to take a sample here and a sample here and then output it. So you have to, essentially, you have to basically say, do I have a left sample and do I have a right sample? Once I have both, then I'm going to deposit it on the output and then let these guys proceed. Okay, I cannot let one microphone race ahead at the cost of other. It has to be in lockstep, a sample from each one of them. So your state machine here would be something along the following lines. Wait for request L to go high and also request R to go high. Okay, so and then you will go into a state where you will do the processing, which was specified there, and then you are going to raise request S. Make sure that the output goes through and then release these guys and then repeat the process. So that's basically what the structure was. All these problems break down to kind of data path, some simple controller, and some handshake with the outside world. Rest of the verbiage out here is really the context. I'm going to try to keep the context simpler, so that feedback I got. But the nature of the problems is kind of along these lines. Okay, so we have some more 3-4 minutes remaining. Any other questions before I wrap the session up?
The finals going to concentrate pretty much on the later half of the course.
Yeah, I mean, other than the fact that there might be a problem where you have to take an FSM implementation all the way, in which case you'll have to implement that.
Where you need like add stuff that's not going to be like K-maps.
No, you may need to do a K-map for a simple FSM. Okay. Yeah, actually, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference when you say the concentration is I mean, even if I exclusively focus a problem on the latter part, you still need to know the K-map to be able to do something, right? Yeah. Huh?
How many questions can you look forward to?
I don't know. That depends on the type of questions. And I try to keep the points corresponding to what I think the time it should take proportionately through the exam.
So, do you think the final will be harder than the midterm?
Final midterm was hard
What about
from the score that it seems, right? I mean, so it was kind of interesting that I think the upper end of the midterm people did fine. The thing is, a lot of students didn't. So the average got pulled very low, but the high end there were some terrific scores. So the spread was huge. Okay, so thing is, I'm going to curve it, so it doesn't really end up mattering that much. But I think let's see. I think I was telling some of the students that came to office hours today that two of the problems which we thought everyone would get it, that did not happen in the midterm. And I'm still puzzled on that one because like the problem where I had the arrow sign operator, which was kind of along the lines of the ternary operator we had in the problem set. So I was expecting everyone to get it. That didn't happen, and I think most of the people had forgotten what high impedance meant, and they blew kind of that one also. So, so sometimes our assumptions go wrong also. Anyway.
So how do you divide by 3? You said you can divide a number by constant. So if I had a variable, not variable, but like input, I want to divide by 3.
Yeah, so how would you divide by 3?
Right
You need
shift.
a bunch of so before
So actually, divide by 3 FSM I had shown earlier today, right? At least for the serial case.
So divide by 2, then subtract it.
You can just right shift by 2 and add.
you have to add point,
Oh.
add 20. I don't know.
See if that
It's a little-
Yeah, so the division is going to be a little trickier, right? I mean, okay. So I can, let's see. So 1 over 3, can I express it as, so how do you do it? 0.25 plus 0.125 plus, and you'll keep doing it until you have adequate bit resolution. Basically. Okay. So you break it up into a series basically, and then multiply. And at some stage, the residual terms will be too tiny to show up in your number of bits that you have. So that's kind of the strategy. Look, any function, even sine, cosine, and all can be. If you recall your Fourier series extensions, basically, kind of that's the concept you can apply. Actually, that brings an interesting question. If I were to ask you to do, let's say, sine of a function, how would you do it? What are different ways you can approach that problem?
Series expansion.
Series expansion, I just told you. Tell me others. Table lookup. I can have a wrong lookup like that, right? Yeah. Oh, this someone said it? Yeah. Okay, you said that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you can do that. There's also a class of algorithm. This is kind of just a side. There's something called chordic algorithms, which is kind of big, but most commonly it's done through series expansion. Okay, so almost every other function that you see are going to be just implemented using series expansion. So all that math you did, they are actually used. I mean, I know at the time you're doing it, seems like totally useless, but that's how this is implemented. Okay. Great. So, any more questions? Post on Piazza. Unfortunately, I think on Monday afternoon, I'll probably be in my office. If you come and want to meet me, something, write to me, and you can find some time. But Monday is also a department review happening, so unfortunately, a lot of things going on. As for the exam itself, I'll come for the initial while, but Paul and Salma are the ones who are going to proctoring it. Okay. So anyway, good luck with the exam. Right, cool. Thank you.